He said, I have to tell you something. Throughout our marriage, I was a child raised by Nanny, and then I was also raised by my sister. My mother was a hard-working woman who struggled with postpartum depression. She wasn't raised by her mother, who was a depressed woman. My education was outsourced and I felt lonely and needed therapy. I managed to find a new meaning for myself, but I spent many years. He said, I have to tell you something. I was a child raised by Nanny, and then I was also raised by my sister. My mother was a hardworking woman who had a hard time with maternity. She wasn't raised by her mother, who was depressed. My education was outsourced and I felt lonely and had to do therapy. I managed to change that, but I spent many years feeling this loneliness. Then my sister got pregnant at 19 and left my house to live in another country. I continued to be raised by babysitters, and my sister was. This was very difficult for me because she was my maternal figure. I remember being 5 and going to the neighbor's house. I rode home and my mother was coming. At the time I had a really tough childhood. I was really lonely, and my sister was pregnant with my first cousin when I was 19. That's when my mom and sister left and I was raised by babysitters. It was really hard because my sister was like a mom to me. I remember being 5 and going to my neighbor's house and my mom was there. She was always busy and didn't have much time for me. I was a lonely kid who spent a lot of time alone watching TV. When I was a teenager, I was still lonely. I also felt really lonely and had low self-esteem. I dated a few boys, but they weren't very nice. Some of them were older men who had problems with drugs, and I never used drugs. I was a very lonely kid, and that carried on into my childhood and adolescence. I was a lonely kid who spent a lot of time alone in front of the TV. I had a lot of loneliness, and I also had a lot of low self-esteem. I dated a few boys, some of whom were not very nice. They were usually older men who had problems with drugs, and I never used drugs. But I had this pattern of wanting to be the one to save and help these boys or men who came into my life. At 14, I was dating this older guy. I think he was about 20 at the time. He was a cocaine user, and it was my first sexual experience at 14 to 15. I stayed in this relationship for 2 years, and he sexually abused me. My first sexual experience was with. I had a hard time with drugs, but I had this pattern in some way. I wanted to be the one to save these boys or men who had been in my life. I was 14 at the time, and I relate to the oldest guy. I think he was about 20 or 21. He was a cocaine user, and it was my first sexual experience from 14 to 15 years old. I stayed in this relationship for 2 years, and he sexually abused me. My first sexual experience was with him. Then, he started to beat me, so there was physical and emotional abuse and a lot of violence. My mother, being religious, wanted me to stay with him. So, for 2 years I stayed trying to help him somehow. I went to support groups, but I never went through therapy at that age. For me, that was the right thing to do. This happened and I was trying to help somehow. It didn't work out. He was very violent with me and spread feces on me. My parents were very worried about me and they wanted me to stay with him. I tried to help him and I went to support groups and therapy, but it didn't work out. He was violent and he spread rumors about me at school. I suffered a lot at the time. I didn't have the law against cyberbullying, and there weren't many photos on the internet. It was still the early days of the internet and I was very bad. I went into depression and spent almost a week without eating. I met another boy who helped me. My ex, who abused me, threatened me with death and came to my house, saying that I had contracted AIDS. I was a teenager at the time, and I had a really hard time. I didn't have the luxury of knowing there was no law against posting photos online. It was still the early days of the internet, and I was really struggling. I went into a deep depression and spent almost a week without eating. Then another boy came into my life and helped me through it. My ex, who had been abusive, showed up at my door, claiming that I had contracted AIDS. My mother was desperate. She wanted me to stay with him because she believed that if I had sex with him, we would have to get married. But things got violent and my parents didn't know what to do. I don't blame them though. My mother had learned that from her own experiences. Then I started to have feelings for this other boy. He was a little older than me and he was a star. He was also very depressed with periods of deep despair. Whether or not it was helpful, I'm not sure. My mother was really worried, but she wanted me to stay with him because she thought that if I had slept with him, we should get married. She thought that if we did that, it would stop the violence and my parents would be happy. I don't blame them because that's what my mother had learned. Then I started dating this other boy. He was my age, but he was a star and really depressed. Sometimes he'd be really depressed for a long time. I tried to help him and he tried to help me. It was my teenage years and it was hard. I was very rebellious and had a lot of trouble with laws, rules, and life in general. I broke up with him and dated someone else who sold drugs and used marijuana. Then I went through a cycle of never-ending problems until I met someone through an online dating app. I was in a relationship for 10 years, and it was a period of my life that I'll always remember. I was very rebellious and I had a lot of difficulty with laws, rules, and life in general. I separated from him and dated another person who was a user of marijuana and a drug dealer. Then I met someone through an online relationship application. It was the first time I felt like I was marrying the right person. He was wonderful right from the start. I saw that he was a guy who traveled, had money, looked financially stable, and was well off. We started to talk and it was a very fluid conversation. He lived in a city about 40 minutes from my house and one day we decided to get to know each other. I had gone through a similar history and dated boys who were users. Roga had several problems, including financial issues. I met him through an online dating app, and from the very first moment, he was absolutely wonderful. He was a kind, generous, and thoughtful guy who had a great job and a nice car. We started talking, and it was like we were meant for each other. He lived in a city about 40 minutes from my house, and one day we decided to meet in person. I had dated other guys before, but this was different. I found a prince and he came to my place. We went out to dinner and he treated me to a fancy restaurant. He was so kind and thoughtful and we talked about all these wonderful things like spirituality and music. He was a really spiritual guy and he studied family. There was just one little red flag, but at the time I didn't realize it. He told me, "I'm engaged and I've been in a relationship with this other woman." I gave her a really expensive ring and she cheated on me. I found a kind, charming prince and we hit it off right away. He came to my place and we had a great time together. He told me he was always on the lookout for a special woman and he was drawn to me. We spent a lot of time together and he was always taking care of me. I was a family girl, so I was a bit hesitant. We had some money problems in college and he didn't eat in nice places. But he was always dressing well and talking about all these exciting travel opportunities. He even carried me around in hotels and I thought we were perfect for each other. I was really looking forward to our relationship, but he made me choose between us and my family. I thought he was the one and we started to get along really well. He was so kind and generous, and he made me feel like I was part of a family. We had a great time on our first date and he even came to visit me. I was so excited, but I had to tell him that I had to focus on my family. He said he always had dinner with his family on Sundays and he wanted to do the same with me. This all started to come together and I said ours. I found a prince who came on horseback to get me. I thought of the chosen one, and I thought of this wonderful man as the one I chose. I let him go and then we started to relate. The first date was great and the second date was also great. He came to see me and the people were like, "This is the one." We were only 2 hours at most and he said, "I have the habit of having dinner with my family every Sunday. We are very united. Me to my mother and my sisters." Then I told him, "Look, I think if we relate, we have to cut a little bit of this umbilical cord. If you want to be with me in the future, we will also create our family, and you can't stay like this." He made an effort to be part of the family and he arrived with his 2 sisters and 1 mother. They were 3 women. Their parents were divorced and he said, "I'm very close with my mother and sisters," and I told him, "Look, if we're going to be together, we'll have to cut the umbilical cord. If you want to be with me in the future, we'll create our own family, and you can't stay like this." He arrived in the family with his 2 sisters and 1 mother. Their parents were divorced and he said, "I'm seeing a girl who says she wants to separate from her family." From that day on, I knew his family already hated her. They said, "This girl is not good for you." But he saw my potential. He told me, "You're smart. You have potential. You're wonderful," and he praised me. I felt like we won a big prize. I won the lottery and then he asked me to date. The day he asked me to date, I had a friend who told me that she knew someone who separated people based on their family. She said that this person's family already hated her, but he saw my potential. He told me, "You're smart, and you have a lot of potential. You're wonderful." I felt so appreciated and I thought, we won a big prize, right? Then he asked me to date, and on the day he asked me to date, he said, "I have a famous intuition that tells me this won't work. There's something about money that will cause problems." I said, "For him, I'm from a very different social class. You're from a rich family. You're completely different from me, who comes from a poor, humble family. I've overcome a lot of challenges." He said, "No, that won't be a problem. Imagine I want to show you something. I have a hunch that this won't work out." I told him, "You're from a different class, with different social background, and you're from a Rika family. You and I are like night and day." He replied, "No, that won't be an issue. I want to show you the good things in life. If my money can provide this, I'll be very happy." We started dating and he talked a lot about the game of life. He said, "This is a game of life. We go through phases, so we'll date for 2 years, then get engaged 2 years later. If we work out, we'll get married, and then." I'm so excited to see what life has in store for you. If I could be of help, I'd be thrilled. If we run into any money troubles, I'll let you know. So we started dating, and he had this whole game of life thing going on. He kept talking about how it's like a journey with different phases. He said we date for 2 years, then get engaged 2 years later. If it works out, we get married, and then we'd have a home. At the time, I was really into these spiritual signs, and he was a Virgo, which I thought was pretty cool. I had this idea that he was a virgin, probably because of that. Then I had a bit of a freak out and got this old car that I bought with my mom. He already started telling me, "Hey, maybe lay off the motorcycle for a bit. It's a bit risky, you know." I was like, "Oh, okay, good point. I was thinking if we got married and had kids, you might have an accident, and I just don't want that." We were given a roadmap to follow, and at the time, I felt a strong connection to these spiritual signs. I said, "He is a Virginian, so that must be the reason." Then I had a revelation. I had a very old car that I bought with my mother, and he already spoke to me like this. "I want you to stop riding a motorcycle because it's very dangerous. If we get married and have children, you could have an accident, and I don't want that to happen." I thought, my son is created only for me. Then I understood that I had to sell this motorcycle. He was putting it in my head, saying, "Look, if we start to get more serious and get married, I'll give you a car. After we get married and have a child, I'll give you another better car." I said, "As you are scaling like a pyramid, I know there's a pyramid you are scaling. In the game of life, I will give you things." When I first met his mother, she said, "Wow, you have names that are similar, and you have the same profession." She was speaking about my son and me. I thought, what if we were to get more serious and get married? There are steps in the process, right? When we get married, I'll give you a car. After we have a child, I'll give you another better car because you're growing like a pyramid. In the game of life, I'll give you things. I even carried him around in hotels. I bought expensive clothes and I was loving the universe. I said, my first plane trip with him was amazing. I also found a wonderful guy for my family. My parents found a great guy and we were dating. Everything was beautiful. When I went to meet his family, I already had some problems because they weren't as fond of me as they were of him. He had told me that they weren't fond of me either. We had a great time on our first trip to the hotel and I bought some nice clothes. I was so happy with the universe. I said my first plane trip with him and my family thought he was a prince. I had found a wonderful guy and we were dating. Everything was great. When I went to meet his family, I had some problems because they weren't as fond of me as they were of him. He told them that I had told him that I had. I talk too much sometimes. I say things that I shouldn't. I wanted to excuse myself and it was all right. The first time I went to meet his mother, we had the same name. His mother said, "Wow, you have names that are similar, and you have the same profession." I told the family and he spoke for me. I talk too much. I say things that I shouldn't. I wanted to do something special with my family. I was excusing myself saying, "Oh, it's okay. I think it happens and it's all right." The first time I went to meet his mother, we had equal names. The mother said, "Wow, you have names. You have names similar to each other. You have the same profession as well." I found it so inelegant and she spoke it very clearly. She said, "Look at my son. He's not for sale. I'm not selling my son. He is not for anyone. I thought it was strange, but as I had already passed by relationships so complex, I said, is it just one more? It's a challenge, but I'll wait. Everything is right. This man is wonderful. Let's go. Let's date. 2 years later, he had the goals, the little things, and he made me sell the motorcycle and the car that I had with my mother because he said they were very old. I almost had an accident with him in Dutra, and then I gave him the money, which was already the first problem. I gave him the money and he bought a Valentino car in his name. At that moment, I lost the money from my motorcycle and the money from my car, and then he bought a cart. It was 2 years ago and he had his goals and his dreams. He asked me to sell the motorcycle and the car that I was using with my mother, saying they were too old. I almost had an accident with him in Dutra and then I gave him the money. He was already having problems. I gave him the money and he bought a Valentino car in his name. At that moment, I lost the money I had saved for my motorcycle and the money I had saved for my car. Then he bought a cart. It was simple, without air conditioning and an old house. He spoke to me. This is the first car that I will give you, right? It's as we're experiencing. Dating is simpler, and if we get married, I'll give you a better car. When we have children, I'll give you a better car. So we go. I thought, okay. He helped me. He gave me paid courses because he wanted me to quit my job. I was a teacher and he spoke. Simple Zinho, without air conditioning, an old house, and he spoke to me. So this is the first car that I will give you, right? It's as we're experiencing it. Dating is simpler, and then if we get married, I'll give you a better car. When we have children, I'll give you a better car. So we go, and I thought, okay. He helped me. He gave me paid courses because he wanted me to quit my job. I was a teacher, and he spoke. There, our teacher earns very little and we can't afford anything. It was kind of an abuse, but I didn't. I realized I had low self-esteem, so it was all beautiful. I had a lot of problems with my mother too. It's very difficult to live with my mother because she's a half-woman controller. Then a phase came when I started to fight a lot with my mother and I went to talk to him. I spoke, look, our teacher was not earning a lot and we didn't have much money. It was a bit of an abusive situation, but I didn't realize it at the time. I had low self-esteem, so it was hard for me to see the beauty in things. I had a lot of problems with my mother too. It was really hard for me to live with her because she was a very controlling person. Then I started to fight a lot with my mother and I went to talk to him. I said, I'm having a lot of disagreement with my mother, and we are already there. Time together that we lived together. He already had an apartment and it was furnished beautifully. He said, you are coming here because you are with a problem with your mother, right? Then I went to live with him, and I remember that in one of the moments of our life together, I drank alcohol one day. I was weak from drinking and I didn't have much of a habit of drinking. I drank a little bit. I've been having some really tough talks with my mom lately. We've been living together for a while now, and it's been a bit of a journey. He had a nice apartment fully furnished and it was really lovely. He said, you're coming here because you're having some issues with your mom, right? Then one day I decided to move in with him. I'm not usually a big drinker, but I had a few drinks that day. I started feeling a bit sick and I said, I'm a little drunk and I'm breathing really heavily. He got annoyed and said, you're just drunk and you're not handling it well. He was really upset with me and he pushed me against the wall and lifted my neck really high. It was a really strange moment. I said, you're not the kind of person who would do that, and he said, I'm not the kind of person who would do that. I started to feel unwell and I said things like, I'm drunk or I'm hyperventilating. He became annoyed and said, hyperventilating? You're drunk. Then he got really angry with me. He pushed me to the wall and lifted my neck, which was really strange. I said, ours, and he suddenly became violent. He was a very sweet man. He talked about how the woman was a goddess on spirituality. I had experienced several abusive relationships, including a physical relationship. My ex put a knife to my neck and tried to kill me at 14. I said, it's not violence and life follows. We kept living together, but he kept talking about my job. You earn very little and you work little. He said that she was like a goddess when it came to spirituality. I had a lot of experience with abusive relationships. I even had a relationship that ended with physical abuse. My ex put a knife to my neck and tried to kill me when I was 14. I told him it's not violence and life goes on. We keep living together, but he kept talking about my job. He said I didn't like it and that I was lazy. I had low self-esteem, so I believed him. I thought I was earning a lot, but I was earning very little. I passed the public contest, so he made me move in with him. He said the fastest way to get a job in the city where he lived was to pass the state public tender for teachers. I had this feeling that you weren't a fan of work, and I kind of took that to heart. I already had some self-esteem issues, so I kept thinking about it. I think I earned a lot, but really not much. I went there, passed the public contest, and then we decided to live with him. Since I passed the public contest, the fastest vacancy would be in the city where he lived, and he spoke like that. He passed in the state public tender for teachers, so I thought that was a big win. And then one day, I arrived at the apartment and looked at the head of our bed. I saw a motel roll, so I called him to talk. I said, "Look, what's this motel roll?" He said, "Hours." At the time, he was already doing therapy and always liked studying psychology. He spoke saying, "It was an act. I need to tell you something. I sometimes go out with someone, but so it won't." I thought it was a great victory, and I was happy to have a break from school. Then one day I arrived at the apartment and saw a roll of motel on the head of our bed. I called him to talk and said, "Look, this roll of motel." He said, "Hours," and I replied at the time I was doing therapy and always liked studying psychology. He spoke, saying, "I need to tell you something. I sometimes go out with someone, but it won't happen anymore. I promise I love you and all those promises." For me, that was a bucket of cold water. I said, "Hours, what I will do with all this information?" He always made my friends clear. Also, do this is normal for men. Do this. You understand. How he is a Japanese family. He spoke there. It's common and normal in Japan. And then I preferred to go back to my parents. I took my things and came back, although I had. This won't happen again, I promise. I love you and I'm so grateful for all the support you've given me. I'm trying to process all this information and I'm trying to understand what's normal for men. Do you think this is normal for men? I'm trying to understand. He's from a Japanese family and he's used to this kind of behavior in Japan. I decided to go back to my parents. I gathered my things and came back. Although I had more or less 22 to 23. I spent a while with my parents again, and I started having problems with my mother. She sent me a message saying, "Let's get married. Let's get engaged. It'll all go well. I promise this won't happen again." It was a slip-up. It was the universe or maybe my unconscious that sent me to show you before we get married. To be honest, I'm very honest in the things I was around 22 or 23 when I came back. I spent some time with my parents again, and I started having problems with my mother. She kept telling me, "Let's get married. Let's get engaged. It'll be fine. I promise this won't happen again." It was a slip of the tongue, a momentary lapse in judgment. I was in a state of unconsciousness and the universe sent me a sign. To be honest, I'm very honest with myself and my actions. I came back and lived with him again. I told him I was feeling very lonely in the city. I felt very alone because my friends, the people I had a bond with, were in another city. He said things like, "You're a bad person and you spend too much." He bought things for me and I told him, "Let me see your card. I'll help you with the expenses." I'm very careful with my money. We were going through a tough time. I came back to him and he was there for me. I told him I felt really alone in the city. I felt so alone because my friends, the people I had a bond with, were in another city. He said things like, "You're a bloodsucker. After you came back, you spent too much." He said he bought things for me and I told him, "Let me see your card. I'll help you with the expenses." I was trying to be careful with my money, but he said no. He said, "You just need to know that you're spending too much," and he always left. This was very clear. You earn very little and I spend too much. I was accepting and he said, "You're going here because you have a problem with your mother. Your mother is not a nice mother, and her friends are too. You don't have friends. Nobody likes you." I went internalizing this and did not see it. He said, "No, you just need to know that you are spending too much and I'm spending too little. I earn very little and you earn a lot." I was accepting of this and he spoke, "You're going here because you have a problem with your mother, right? Your mother is not a nice mother and neither are her friends. You don't have friends, nobody likes you. I went internalizing this and did not see it. As one abuse there, we got engaged and then he spoke. Look, it's 2 more years of engagement right of the years of dating. 2 years of engagement. We stayed engaged and one day I committed to the idea of adopting a second cat because I thought my cat was sad. And he didn't want much, but he accepted. Then this cat came and they started to fight with my current cat, which made part of it right until they understood each other. One day, I started to see another. We got engaged after we met and then he spoke. It's been 2 years since then and 2 years of engagement. We stayed engaged and one day I said I wanted to adopt a second cat because I thought my cat was sad and he didn't want much, but he accepted. Then this cat came and started to fight with my current cat, and they took some time to understand each other. One day, I started to see another side of him. He started to get very violent, even beating this cat new. There was a day that these 2 cats had a fight, and he was very furious. He ran to the kitchen, and we had a laundry. He broke all the buckets, kicked all of them. I wondered if he had a history of violence and if he was a man who had nozzles of violence. I had a similar history with my father, but I've since passed it. I said, I think it's just sometimes I have to do less things. He was a bit short-tempered and I think he was just tired from working so much. I always told him that he worked too hard. He took care of the house and everything else. We finally decided on a wedding date, and the same problems that I mentioned before happened again. He started to play in the face and he spent too much money. The wedding was going to be expensive and he had a very good income. I think my father is tired. He works so hard and has so much responsibility. He takes care of the house and everything else. We finally decided on a wedding date. He was very excited about the wedding, but he had some problems with working with his mother. He said the money came from his mother, and he didn't want to talk about it too much because it's a sensitive topic. Then he asked me to marry him. My parents, who are very kind, offered to pay half of the wedding. I don't know how they were able to do that. We were hoping to make around $15,000 a month, but he had some concerns about working with the mother. He mentioned that the money came from his mother, and I'm not going to get into the details too much because it's a sensitive topic. Then he offered to plan the wedding with my parents, even though it was just a family thing. I'm not sure how he came up with that idea. My father agreed, and I think he was happy to contribute financially because he knew it was important to me. He saw that I was happy, and he wanted to make sure I got the same kind of happy marriage that my sister had, even though it was a bit of a journey. That's what older folks believe. If you marry a good provider, your marriage will be good. The whole wedding planning process was a bit stressful and it was really different from my sister's experience. My sister said things that made it really hard for me. My father had joined the church there and I think he was happy to see me so happy. He knew it was his dream for me to marry the same way my sister did, even though it was difficult. He believed that older people should marry a good provider, but the marriage was tense. During the wedding planning, we had a meeting between families which was very different from my experience. It was super stressful. My sister said things like, "This is terrible." At the party, he was like, "I'm not Benquista in that family, but I'm willing to do everything to keep that one man." We were packing, so I tried to do my best with an online manual. I'm an artist too, and I said, "I'll do as much as I get because I can't spend money." Then he spoke up. I realized that I wasn't Benquista in that family, but I was still determined to do everything I could to keep that one man. Then, as we were packing for the wedding, I tried my best with an old manual. I'm an artist, so I work with manual things. I said I would do as much as I could because I couldn't spend money. Then my man spoke and it was a lot of fighting. It was a fight not to start the previous right from the wedding to the preparations. It was very difficult and they arrived tired, complaining about money. I felt alone, but I did everything. I went to sleep at dawn, did all the favors, and tried to do everything as best as possible, making it more beautiful than it could have been, while spending little to no money. Then about 3 days before the wedding I asked for. My man and I had a bit of a rough time with our wedding. It was a struggle from start to finish and it was really tough. We had a lot of arguments about money and I felt so alone. But I did everything I could to make things better. I worked really hard, and I tried to do everything to make it as beautiful as possible. I spent a lot of money and then about 3 days before the wedding I asked for help. I asked for help with the souvenirs and I made all the stickers by hand. It was a lot of work and we had some pretty intense arguments. At home, we had a deal that every time we closed the couch it would retract into a sofa. If the cat wasn't inside, he would get really annoyed and close the sofa. My cat came out from inside Miano, and he went after the stove. He was so kind and helpful and he made the souvenir by hand. We had a deal at home that if you closed the couch it would retract into a sofa. My cat, Miano, was very annoyed when he closed the sofa. He came out from inside it, and I saw that he was agitated. We took him to the emergency vet right away, and my cat passed away. He was missing for 3 days before my marriage, and then 3 days before my wedding. I am very connected to spirituality. Later, I went to understand what I was right about. I got the information that she was taking the whole negative charge, everything that was rolling there, and she preferred to sacrifice. I felt her pain and I couldn't help but worry. I had just gone through the emergency room with my cat, who passed away a few days earlier. Then 3 days before my wedding, my cat passed away. I felt so connected to her spiritually. I later found out that she was taking on all the negative energy and making a sacrifice. I got married and it was a little stressful. The family wasn't very happy. They went on their honeymoon in Fernando de Noronha. It was expensive and they complained about the cost. It was an expensive trip and the wedding was expensive. Imagine wanting to relax after all this stress from the loss and the person talking about money. Money was always a bit of a struggle, but that's okay, right? He was a great guy and I really missed him. On our trip, I had a moment of regret. Wow, I wish I had done that. We held on to the wedding for the first year, which was a bit of a challenge. Then he started talking about having a baby, which wasn't really my dream. But my gut was telling me that if I had kids, I'd be tied down to this guy. Honey, I was right to get married and my family loved him because he was a good boy. He was a wonderful man to my friends and me. He made it very clear that I was the one who cooked and paid everything. Then he made it very clear that he did everything right. He said he was right for me. He said I was lazy and didn't like to cook. He said that when you are a mother, you are forgotten. He said that when you are a mother, we have to see a way for you not to forget the child in the. I'm so glad we're on the same page about the car. I really didn't want you to die from asphyxiation, which is why I didn't leave you with the motorcycle. I'm a great father, but I'm not sure if you'll be a good mother. I know she will undermine you and you will internalize it. I remember making an agenda and writing on it like this: be a wife. Be better at cooking. I kept trying to. I've learned to be a better person and I've had a bit of a rough time staying in places with a lot of people. He said, no, you have to go with me when you marry. We have to go with the person to places that she goes. Then every Sunday we went to lunch with his family and he said, you don't. There are friends, so let's live with my friends. And just speaking gives me a cure like that. Anyway, I went on my first trip to Brazil with a friend, and it was such an amazing experience. When I went back, I was treated with alchemy, which is what I work with now. This treatment I was doing helped me get pregnant, but I didn't really do it to get pregnant. I was doing it because I wanted to find a better job, tidy up customers, and work on my art therapy. I'm so grateful that he spoke up for you. It's important to make money, you know? You have to make money. You work so hard. You're so sensitive. You're so caring. You're so loving. You're so sweet. You're so kind. You're so giving. You're so selfless. You're so supportive. You're so understanding. You're so thoughtful. 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 I had thought that the delivery would be a home delivery, but my body just couldn't handle it. I went to the hospital, and after 36 hours of labor, my son was born. I was really scared and I wanted to leave because I was so scared. Then the psychologist spoke to me, and she said that I was scared because I knew that having a baby would change my life and it would be really hard. I was the same during my pregnancy. I only talked about money, money, money. I remember. That was when I was 8 months pregnant. My parents were staying with me and I was living in a rented house. The baby's room was going to be really cold with a cold floor. I said, we need to put in some laminate flooring. He said, we don't have the money for that. I said, but I'd really like to have it. So we went to US to store my father's and my mother's things. We bought the laminate. I put in the laminate while I was pregnant. I spent afternoons kneeling and cutting. Sometimes he arrived. He cut with the machine right after the service and he was so focused on the task that he didn't even stop to talk. I was so nervous because I didn't know how to welcome the baby. I felt completely alone. I cried for days because I felt lonely. He said I'm not prepared, that I'm just thinking about the expense that this will bring. He made it very clear that his dream was to be a father, and if he wasn't going to be a father, he was going to separate from me. I spent after 9 months of waiting. The loneliness of childhood came back when I was pregnant. Music. I had my son and I continued to feel lonely. Then he started playing a social role. He took pictures with my parents. They came to visit me at home. He said, look, I'm cooking. I cook for the child. The child wants to sleep with me. He wants to sleep with the mother. Hey, I'm a great father. He was speaking in my head. You think you will be a good mother. It's not good that I do. I am a good father. But he undermined my trust as a mother. We don't know how to be mothers. The first child will know if I am doing right or wrong, and I kept thinking, I'm doing all our wrongs. I will forget the child inside the car. She will die suffocated. We were talking about money and then he sold my car. He had me switch to a better car, but he was trying to trick me. We ended up with one car and he said, when you have a second child, I'll get you a better car. But we weren't keeping track of the expenses, not even for the first car. And that was it. Before I got pregnant, I was already thinking about separating and doing therapy. I was thinking about divorce because I knew I was in an abusive cycle and was entering depression. I didn't realize at the time that I was struggling with depression. I thought it was just a bit of melancholy and I was sure things would get better. But I felt like there was a gray cloud following me around. Then I started taking care of my son and I began to feel depressed. Today I realized that I was depressed and he told me that he was working very hard but earning very little. He said he couldn't afford a nanny or school for more than a few hours each day. A trip to the US. You'll continue at this school for as long as you like. What is the child like? Take care of the child. I'll always give you everything we have. We have a king's life here. We travel outside the country. People eat well in restaurants. Then we can think about setting up a company. I was already starting to be a therapist in this era, and he spoke. Keep trying to fix money. Keep trying to find customers. I paid for these courses for you. I played in the face. I paid for these courses. You have to turn around. You have winning money, and then I abandoned my public contest. My father said. At the time I spoke, daughter doesn't do that. You will be unemployed and people will think badly of you. I was not going to stay with the rest of my life, right? I abandoned the room class and then I was taking care of my son half of the time. Then I tried to focus on desperate therapy to get customers, and he was always complaining about money. I was going through a tough time, complaining about money, and I felt like I was holding myself back. But my son was already 2 years old and I started working really hard on alchemy, which was the path I was studying. I started taking a lot of floral remedies and they helped me a lot. At one point, I realized that marriage wasn't for me. I felt like it was holding me back from growing. I felt like a victim and I was depressed, so I spent most of the day. I couldn't do anything at all. I just stayed on the couch waiting for him to arrive. When he did, I did a little theater performance pretending that everything was fine. I made a whole theater, but during the day I was sick. I was unhappy when I was with my son, but then a beautiful day arrived and I was feeling much better. I started to swim, and in the water I found her to be a truly lovely person. I had never been interested in women before. I was heterosexual and everything was fine in my life. Then I saw a girl and thought, what a beautiful girl. If she was interested, I thought this could be the start of something special. I added her on the internet, and she moved to her mother's city because she was having financial difficulties during the pandemic era. We stayed in touch and over time we fell for each other. I was chatting with my friend on WhatsApp and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting a divorce. I'm thinking of moving back to my city." She was surprised, but I assured her that I would help her. "I'm so glad to be able to help you, and I'll do everything I can. I'm thinking of moving closer to the people I care about." Then a day later I thought I was cheating. I told him, "No, I talked to a friend." She said, "Naughty, if you're okay, and if you're interested in her, tell him right away. He is such a cool guy, and he seems to be a. My husband is such a great guy." I thought he was a wonderful husband and he was super supportive. He did therapy and really helped me understand myself. We even started a company together in the city where I live now. A few days ago I was talking to this girl and we were talking about work things. I took my husband's phone and typed in a name and I ended up on the Priv website. He was already my husband, was such a great husband. I thought he was wonderful. He was super supportive and we had already started a company together in the city where I live today. I was talking to this girl and a few days before we were talking about work things. I took his phone and typed in a name and I ended up on the Priv website. He was already sleeping in the room because he had a problem with snoring. He was already in the room and I knew that at night he had more or less an idea of what was going on. I didn't know he was investing money on these sites. Then after a long time I learned that these sites are very expensive. You pay a fortune, and he said that I was spending his money. I spent a lot now. He had a hard time sleeping in the same room because of his snoring. I knew he was watching things online, but I didn't realize he was spending money on websites. After our divorce, I learned that these sites are expensive. You spend a lot of money, and he said I was spending a lot too. The son was spending a lot more, and we had a discussion. I said, "Look, I'm going to stop." I was already talking to a girl. I told him, "Look at me. I'm getting to know a person and want to find out more about this side of them. I think I can be bisexual and want to experience this." He said, "Okay, all good." Did not make the. He was spending a lot more and I felt like I was holding back. I told him, "I'm talking to someone, and I want to get to know the other side of me. I think I might be bisexual, and I want to experience that." He said, "Okay, all good." I didn't make any effort. I just gathered my things and decided to go back to my city. It was Christmas season and there was a pandemic. He went to the mall and spoke, so I chose a gift that I could send to her by mail. I bought a gift that we could enjoy together. Then he bought the gift. He said, "I'm not going out because I'm with my son at home." He said everything with just a slight effort. He said, "Just get your things and we'll head back to your city." It was the Christmas season and there was a pandemic. He went to the mall and spoke, "So you chose a gift that you could send to her by mail." I bought a gift that we could enjoy together, and then he bought a gift. He took the king because it was a pandemic time and we couldn't go out. I was with my son at home and he said it would be all right. "You will be and will be all right." And in that we were still working together. He helped me find an apartment here in my city, in my parents' city. Then we decided to get a divorce. We had a horrible fight when people decided to get a divorce for good. He had several friends in the city where people live, Ava. Right, that it was a city neighbor. He made it very clear that he wanted my friends to be his friends, and we liked the couple that we had. Don't worry, honey. Everything's going to be all right. We're still working together, and he's helping me find an apartment here in our city. My parents live here and we decided to get a divorce. We had a big fight when we decided to get divorced, and he had several friends in the city where we live. He made it very clear that he wanted my friends, and we like this couple. They're going to be my friends if we ever separate. At that time he said, When I separate from you, I'll find a very silly woman to take care of me, since you didn't like to cook. I'll find a very silly woman this time. I won't find a good silly woman. And then one day we were still with the. He said, I need to tell you something. During our marriage, I was unfaithful to you with a prostitute. I have a problem with that. I'm doing therapy, but you need to know that. I always worked in a city and lived in another one. At the time we were married, he worked in the same city where my parents lived now, and the people lived in another city. Then he came to my city. We were together during the pandemic. He said, I want to tell you something. During our marriage, I did something wrong. I'm sorry. I'm working on it, but you need to know that. I always worked in a different city, and I lived in another city when we were married. At the time, he worked in the same city as my parents who still live there. I think he dated prostitutes and he told me about it. I never repeated what he said. This is normal, right? My friends do it too. So you have to understand that at the time we were kind of separating without fighting because I had just started to make money. I thought it was normal. I didn't see any of this as abuse. Then he said, I also need you to tell me something about my ex coming back. I think he was with prostitutes and he told me. He told me he was going to do the same thing with me, but then people started gossiping. I never repeated what he said because I know that's not normal. At the time we were kind of separating, but not fighting. I had just started making money and I thought it was right. I didn't see any of this as abuse or wrong. Then he said, I also need you. Tell me something about my ex coming back. Music. As she actually didn't betray her. She found out that I had betrayed her with a prostitute. This was because she lived in another city, and when she was there, he betrayed her with a prostitute. Then she didn't want to get married, but she later went to research him. I thought this woman was wonderful. I kept thinking this woman wants to get married. At the start, she was there with the first star flag, Music. You see, she didn't betray me. She found out that I had cheated on her with a prostitute. She was living in another city at the time. When she was there, she also had an affair with a prostitute. Then she didn't want to get married, but she later changed her mind. I kept thinking this woman is definitely someone I could build a life with. I think she thought about it and she decided it wasn't the right choice for her. She decided to stay with him. I think she thought about it and she decided it wasn't the right choice for her. She didn't use it because she wasn't sure if I would do the same. I think she preferred to leave. That's what he told the whole family and friends. He told them he had cheated on her and he was going to do the same with me. Then people started to go. I'm sure she wanted to stay with him, but I think she realized it wasn't going to work out, so she won the alliance. She didn't use it because she wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. I think she preferred to jump out, and that's what he told the whole family and friends. He said he had betrayed her and that he was going to do the same with me. Then people started gossiping. After the divorce and the great problem, I left home with only one article of decoration because I really liked decorations, a TV, a child, and nothing more. I had a dream to know this girl, right, who had not yet known her, and to be happy and to know that everything was right and that we were going to separate. He said, I will never let you have a hard time. Let's do things from the mouth we don't need. After the roles of divorce and then the great problem, I left home with only an article of decoration because I really liked it. I had a TV, a child, and nothing more. I had a dream. What was going to happen to this girl, right, who had not yet known her? That she was going to be happy and that everything was right. That we were going to separate. He said, I will never let you have difficulty. Let's do things from the mouth. We don't need a lawyer. I will always take care of you and our son. Then my sister said, No, 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 no. You will run after a lawyer and behind his rights. There is this Natalia, for the love of God. Do not do this. I almost accepted a bad deal and my sister spoke to me. We're at the end of the pandemic. This money will not give you a year with the small son paying rent. You will pass the difficulty. I went after a lawyer. A lawyer will be there for you and our son. My sister said, No, 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 no. You will pursue a lawyer and his rights. There's Natalia, for the love of God. Please don't do this. I almost accepted a bad deal and my sister said, We're at the end of the pandemic. This money won't last a year with the little boy paying rent. You will face difficulties. I went after a lawyer and it started a fight. He said, No need for a lawyer. Everything I have here is mine. I won with my money. I will enter the litigation and you will have no money, no rights, and nothing. I understood this. Everything here was with my money. You never helped. You are a bloodsucker, and then it started. I took a cheap lawyer. She made a terrible deal, but in time we get so disoriented that we just want to get out. It all started there. I had no support system, so I had to figure things out on my own. I had $5,000 and I said to myself, people, I need to buy a car with $5,000. But I knew that with that amount, I wouldn't be able to get a car. But I spoke, and my dad listened. He said, I'll help you, but you have to speak to a lawyer. I said, no need, I'll handle everything with my money. If I lose, I'll have nothing, but I'll have fought. Everything was a struggle. I was on my own and I had to figure things out. I took a cheap lawyer and she made a terrible deal. But in time we got so disoriented that we just wanted to leave the abuse cycle. I accepted that God would make things right. We would make a bad deal. He got everything, a car, all the furniture, and everything. He gave me $1. I started spending almost all of it to furnish my house. I bought an old refrigerator and everything old and used. I did that so I could restructure my life. I got a rent. I really wanted to break free from the abuse and I accepted that I would speak whatever God wanted. We would make a deal and I would give him everything I had. He gave me a car, furniture, and everything I needed to start over. I basically spent almost all of it because I needed to furnish my house, so I bought an old refrigerator and other used items. I did this so I could restructure my life and get a new place. I got a rent-free apartment from my mother, so I had no support network. Our city is great, right? I lived in a place far from my car. I didn't have the money to buy a car. And then the only money I had was $5,000. I said, people, I need to buy a car with $5,000. My father and daughter were there. But a car with $5,000 won't get you a car with $5,000. I spoke to my dad. I really needed a car. How was I going to leave my son with his mother while I visited you? I really needed help, and he was the only one who could see everything. The girl just wanted to be with you, and she helped me a lot. She was like an angel who appeared in my life and helped me a lot. In this new house there was a cute girl, but it didn't work out. He was still in our lives and we continued to visit. Then we stayed. I'm in need of a car. I'm worried about leaving my son with his mother while I visit you. I'd really appreciate some help. The girl and I have been together for 2 months now. She's been so supportive, like an angel in my life. She helped me a lot with the move and she was so kind. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but we still keep in touch. We've been seeing each other for a year now. I've heard some things about her and he tried to hurt me with my best friend. He went to my best friend's city to talk badly about me. My best friend knew everything about me and she just heard he tried to hurt my mother and my parents. He came to my house with my parents to say that I had betrayed him, who had dropped a wedding. Once again, we know the people are still together for a year. And even though I listened to it all, that's right. He said several things and tried to harm me with my best friend. He went to my best friend's city to talk badly about me, and my best friend knew everything about me. She just heard he tried to harm my mother and my parents. He came to my house with my parents to say that I had betrayed him. He had dropped a wedding. Wonderful. A man, a wonderful person, tried to do this with my sister's friend. He said he was going to take him. It really took him to the first person who, when we fought, went to sleep at that couple's house. He came from the city 40 minutes to sleep in the house of this couple, and he had several friends in our city, but he came to my friend's city to talk badly about me, and then, this man was wonderful. He tried to do the same thing with my sister, who is a friend of a friend. He said he was going to take him. It really took him to the first person who came to visit us when we fought. He went to sleep at that couple's house. He drove for 40 minutes to sleep in the house of this couple, and he had several friends in our city. But he came to the city of our friends to talk badly about me, and then, they are not mine. Real friends would be firmly there with me, and this joke would be the only thing they would trust me with. I didn't have anyone betray me. My sister was my parents, my best friend, and the rest of his family should hate me. I hated myself to this day. We try to have a good, convivial relationship because of my son. His friends never spoke to me again because he told the same story, that they're not mine. I'm sure you'd agree that real friends stick together, right? If they were mine, they'd be here with me, and this wouldn't be a joke. The only people who trusted me were my sister, my parents, and my best friend. I'm sure you can imagine how my sister and I felt when our family rejected us. We tried to keep things together for our son, but it was hard. My son's friends didn't speak to me again after I told them the same story. I told them that I had betrayed my ex-husband's marriage and that he was a wonderful father who dreamed of being a dad. He came to visit me one day, and I told him that I wasn't here to talk badly about my parents. My sister and I spoke to our parents, and they did everything they could to help. I continued with him for 3 years and then we separated. I moved 5 times because I had a lot of difficulty keeping the rent for my son and my pension. He was a wonderful father to my son. He had a dream of being a father, and that was his passion. One day he came to me and said, "I'm not here to talk about anything bad about my parents." He spoke to my sister, and they did everything together. For 3 years we were separated. I moved 5 times because I had a lot of difficulty keeping the rent paid and supporting my son and myself on my pension. It was very high because he claimed that I had a job as an independent contractor and was doing very well. He took off his bills. I think he passed everything to the name of someone from my family, so he had nothing. The apartment we had was financed, and he said, "You never will have money to maintain this apartment. You should leave. I'll pay the debt, and everything will be fine." I got a little bit of the apartment. He said it was very high because he claimed that I had worked as an autonomous and he had won a lot of money. He said he had won the money and he gave it to someone from my family, so he had nothing. He claimed that he had no apartment, but we had financed it together. Then he said, "You never will have money to maintain this apartment. You'd better leave the apartment with me. I'll pay the debt and everything will be fine." I got a little bit of the apartment, a little bit. Because they evaluated it well below market value, I bought a car for 5,000 Brazilian reals. The car gave me a lot of headaches. My father helped me after I bought a second car for this track, which I sold. I managed to sell this car and bought another one. I spent almost 10,000 Brazilian reals and my father helped. This car almost caused an accident and I was left with my son. He knew everything and he left me with my son and a small son. I was able to buy a car with the money I received from my father, which was a huge help. I had a bit of trouble with the car, but my father was there for me. He told me that I might face some challenges, but he promised to help me get through them. He said that I might not be able to travel as much, and that I might not have a car like the one I have now. But he was right. When I took the car to the mechanic, he told me that it was supposed to have died because the brake was glued, and I had traveled with my. He was so kind and offered to help me buy a car, but he made a point of to help us because he spoke. "You will suffer. You will pass difficulty. You will want to go back to me. You never more will travel. You will never have a good car. You will never have a life like us." There was a car when I took it in. A good mechanic said to me it was supposed to have died. The brake was glued and I traveled with my son to Sarah. He said, "I don't know how you know. They died," and then my father spoke. "Natalia no longer gives no daughter. I will help you really." My dad winning little. We did everything I asked of him. He for the love of God I called him. I spoke for love. God asks your mother lend it. He spoke. "I don't have money. I don't have money." I said. I advanced the money from the pension. "I need to buy a car. Us almost died," and I said, He said, "I don't know how you do it, my dear." Then my father spoke. "Natalia, I'm so grateful for your help. I'm your son and I'm here to support you in any way I can." I asked him for help and he agreed to lend me some money. I told him, "I don't have any money right now, but I'll get it from my pension. I need to buy a car and I'm almost out of money." He said, "I'm going through a difficult time myself, but I'll advance the value of the pension and I'll help you with the rest." He started to relate to another person and he is that person today. Then we stopped talking. He saw that he was going to give and then we finished. I was doing therapy and the therapist said, "You can't play that. It's a happy family after all that happened." I managed to leave and focus on myself. I was going through a tough time and I really needed some support. He helped me out a lot and we even started a business together. At first it was a struggle, but we managed to get through it. He said that the company wouldn't work, that it was a waste of time. He thought we should focus on a few women and not try to sell to too many. But he also wanted me to improve my life, even though he knew that if I got more money, I would probably leave. Before we got divorced, I started a company with these stools, vaporization of the uterus, and therapy. But he said these Bangka-In-Hos never would work. You would never be able to sell to many women. You would sell to 5 and that would be it. It was a very small niche, and at the same time he wanted me to improve my life, but he didn't want me to grow financially because he knew that if I did, I was going to leave him. And that was very clear. I spent a lot of difficulty at the beginning, speaking to all women. The beginning is very difficult. No one thinks that a divorce will be easy. So I often wanted to go back with him because it was so hard. I was having difficulty. One day, I remember I was eating bread with egg and sometimes rice with egg with my son because I had money to pay the rent. Sometimes I didn't have money for food. One day, when I had a really hard time at the beginning, and I want to be honest with you. When I got divorced, I thought it would be easy, but it wasn't. I often wanted to get back together with my ex because it was so hard. I was struggling and sometimes I didn't have enough money to pay the rent. One day, I went to his house and we were still getting along. When I opened the refrigerator, I saw that there was a lot of organic fruit and vegetables spoiling. I thought, this man buys a lot of spoiled food and we're struggling. He went home with me and I didn't give him any money. My sister spoke up. Natalia, he's still living in your house and eating there. You're paying him a lot of rent for the love of God. And then we were still in touch, and when I opened the refrigerator, I found a lot of spoiled fruit and vegetables. I thought, this man buys a lot of spoiled food, and we're struggling. He went home with me, and I didn't give him a penny more. My sister spoke up. Natalia woke up. He's still in your house, eating in his home. You're paying him a lot of rent for the love of God. Then I managed to get out of this cycle. It was very difficult, but I made a change. I moved closer to my parents to help my mother because I saw that he wasn't going to help, even though he said he wanted to be a father. He didn't want to stay longer to help me because I needed to work today. I get my son 22 days a month and he is only 8. I didn't want to increase the time and I never wanted the pension. He left CL Wellen. I was able to break free from that cycle and it was a real struggle. I asked my parents for help and they were kind enough to let me stay with them for a while. I saw that my mom wasn't really interested in being a father, even though he said he wanted to be. He didn't want to stay longer to help me out, so I decided to get my son, who is now 22 days old, and my son, who is 8. I didn't want to ask for more time and I didn't want him to get a pension. He worked independently and I couldn't pay him much. Then he had the nerve to talk to a lawyer. So I'll have to pay this until he gets a job. The person who gets a job will have to pay me the pension because everything I built here, this house, was with my money. She never helped me at all, and the psychic and the psychologist said the same. Everything you have here is thanks to her because she was with her son. She was also struggling, not. He worked independently, and I couldn't pay much, but he still had the audacity to talk to a lawyer. So I'll have to pay this until I'm 18. If she gets a job, she'll have to pay me the pension because everything I built here, this house, all went with my money. She never helped me at all. The psychic psychologist and the lawyer spoke, but everything you have here is thanks to her. She was working with her son and she was struggling. It was just merit, yours, and then I had a hard time, but I committed to getting a car, a house, and a trip because I wanted to prove to myself and to him that I could do things we did when we were married. I went back to teaching. I joined a money-making group and I took my first trip alone, right? I actually went with a friend and used my money to go to Colombia last year. I lived with my parents again. I asked for help. I spoke to my dad. I'm so grateful to have been able to buy a car and a house and plan a trip. I wanted to show myself and my husband that I could do things on my own. I went back to teaching, got a job, and made my first trip alone. I went to Colombia last year with a friend and used my money. I lived with my parents again and asked for help. I said, Mom, I need to buy an apartment and go back. My parents took me in with the greatest love in the world. I saved up and moved into my own apartment. Now I have my own apartment, but it's rented, so I had to move back in with my parents. I say there have been 5 changes in 3 years. My son still hasn't had a place to call his own because we've moved so many times. It hasn't happened yet because I moved to my apartment. I'm so excited to share my journey with you. I recently bought an apartment, which has allowed me to start a new chapter in my life. My parents have always been my rock, and I'm grateful for the love and support they've given me. Recently, I decided to move back home to be closer to my parents. I've been working hard to save money for a new place, and today, I'm thrilled to say that I've bought my own apartment. Over the past few years, I've been through a lot of changes. My son has been through a lot too, and it's heartbreaking to see him go through it. We've moved around a lot because of my job, and it hasn't been easy on him. This year, I decided to put all my energy into my company and help other women. That's why I'm here today, sharing my story. I want to help more women break free from the cycle of abuse and find strength within themselves. Today, I'm focusing all my energy on my company and helping others. I bought a car today. I was unemployed for a while and I had some trouble with some teachers at my workplace this year. I had to take time off from work, but I'm back now and ready to focus 100% on my company and help other women. I'm here today to tell my story because I want to help more women escape the cycle of abuse that we sometimes call abuse. We can get out of this cycle, and today my focus is on my company. I believe that I'll be back home soon to my apartment. I managed to buy a car today, not an old one, and I'm giving it to me. I'm still in the process of self-knowledge and self-love, doing therapy and taking care of myself and loving myself. If I don't love myself, no one will love me. I live with my parents again, and my relationship with my mother is. I'm doing so much better. I think it was just what I needed to get my relationship with my mom back on track. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was also struggling with suicidal thoughts during my divorce. What helped me the most was yoga. I couldn't afford therapy at the time, not even for myself. But yoga was my saving grace. It was a really tough time and I was almost 2. I'm doing so much better. I'm healing my relationship with my mother and embracing my feminine side. I didn't realize it at the time, but my divorce was actually an opportunity for me to heal. I even thought about suicide, but yoga helped me get through it. I was so broke at the time that I couldn't even pay for therapy. I couldn't even buy food, and that's what helped me get through it. It was a very difficult 2.5 years, but today I'm doing really well. I'm in the best phase of my life. I see now that I was very courageous to leave my son for 2 years, but I had nothing. I had nothing, but I won. Now I have my company to help other women understand themselves and get out of cycles of abuse. I'm so grateful to have graduated in alchemy, and my FOC is Alchemy Female because it was the alchemy that saved me, the alchemy that made me see the abuse I was suffering. It was she who gave me this courage and this impulse to jump without fear. I won't say without fear, but jump from wedding, marriage, and alchemy. She healed me from my abuse and healed me from this second abuse. I've always wanted to help more women because I was a teacher for 10 years and I saw so many victims of abuse. When I told my students my story of abuse, I was 14 or 15 years old, and I wanted to help other girls and boys. I had a goal to help more girls who had been abused, and then I met the Stool of Vaporization, which is a work with herbs based on the owl. My idea has always been to support more women because I was a teacher for 10 years and I saw many victims of abuse. In my history class, I always shared my story of abuse, which occurred when I was 14 to 15 years old. I had a goal of helping more girls who had experienced abuse in my classroom. Then I met the Stool of Vaporization, which is a work with herbs based on the alchemy we use. We use these herbs and this steam to clean and heal the uterus in the trauma and suffering from abuse. This healing goes through all lineage. My proposal has always been to help women who were victims of abuse, as I did when I did therapy and constellation. Of course, all my previous lineage had suffered abuse and we use these herbs and steam to clean and heal the uterus and vulva. It's a wonderful way to release the trauma, abuse, and suffering. It's a healing process that goes through all lineage. I've always wanted to help women who were victims of abuse. I went through therapy and constellation work and it was really beneficial. Of course, I had experienced abuse in my previous life too. I came to Finland to help others to end this cycle. My company is dedicated to helping more and more women. When I met your Instagram, I started hearing stories and realized that more women need to exist. We need to help women leave these marriages and escape constant abuse. I've been working with a company called I Am Mana for some time now, and I'm passionate about helping women break free from abusive relationships. When I discovered your Instagram, I was blown away by the stories I heard. It made me realize that we need to support more women in healing from abuse and finding their way out of these situations. I'm dedicated to this cause and am committed to helping as many women as possible. My work involves alchemy, vaporization, and herbs, and it's something I'm truly passionate about. Ever since I left my wedding, I felt like I wasn't able to grow any more inside. And that's why I've been so focused on this journey. Vaporization helps, so I'm taking this work to more and more women all over the world to heal our uterus because there's trauma and abuse there, and we need to address it. My work involves alchemy, vaporization, and herbs. Since I left my wedding, I felt like I wasn't going to grow there anymore. I felt like my company wasn't going to grow anymore there, and the soil was no longer fertile. I started working with the IMA, and he gave me these tools. I left with them because he said I would never sell them. I left thinking, what am I going to do with these stools? Then a woman from nothing contacted me and asked to buy them online. I left there and started. I had the idea that my company wasn't going to grow much more in that soil. It wasn't as fertile as it once was. I started with the IMA because he came and I had these stools. I left with them because he said I'd never sell them. I thought, what am I going to do with these stools? Then, a woman from nothing contacted me and asked to buy them online. I left and started selling nonstop, and that paid the rent for the month. Since that day, my greatest desire is that many other women can get out of these cycles, and women can redefine these abuses and moments of suffering they've experienced and believe are possible. I think that's it. I wish more and more women could reunite themselves and redefine loneliness and lack of fear and find happiness. I'm so happy to be able to help women like this. I found that when I help women, it helps me too. I found that when I help a woman, I help myself. We all heal together. I'm so glad you're doing this work. You're healing others and yourself. I want us all to heal together. Music. I'm so glad you thought of the history of Natalia. I left the air in the I'm curious to know what you think about this stool. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to share them here. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you'd like to tell your own story on our channel, just fill out the form in the video description. Next up, we have the incredible story of Dora, a lesbian who came out after her divorce. I'm sure you'll be inspired by her high spirits and life story, including a love story that will leave you heartbroken. Don't miss out on this opportunity. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to stay updated. Music.